This evening, the bulk of the agenda has to do with presentations from the second half of our applicants for this funding cycle. As in the past, with the presentations, I would like the applicants to assume that each committee member has read your application completely and fully. And so would like you to focus on what you feel is the most important elements of your application and any new material you would like to present this evening that is not included in the application. We ask that you keep your remarks to approximately 10 minutes. Then the committee will ask questions of you if they have any. We will put it out to members of the public. There may be some attending either in person or by Zoom, and they may have questions. And those people with questions should present them as the application is heard. I think that's it in terms of process. So for the first item on the agenda, we need to do a roll call to determine who's here and who's not. Do we have any members of the committee attending by Zoom?
No, we don't.
Okay. So. Hey, the roll call. Jane Healy.
Here.
Chuck Griffith. Here. Tom O'Brien. Biff Baus. Here. Joe Texera. Here. Jamie Gagner. Here. Jennifer Bluestein. Andrea Wheatman. Andrea, I believe as with the last meeting, you're still awaiting the second reading for your appointment. So your participation tonight is welcome. Ask questions if you have them, but you will not be voting on any votes that we take. And there will be no votes as to the merits of any of the applications, either in the last meeting or in this meeting. We will have a meeting on the 21st. To do the deliberations and the voting at that time on recommendations that we will make to City Council for funding of projects. Hey, number 2 on the agenda tonight. The Lower Atkinson Common Improvement Project has submitted an amendment to their request that actually originated in the last cycle. Kim, would you like to address the committee?
Sure. Thank you all again for your time tonight. I apologize in advance. You're going to be hearing a lot from me tonight, but hopefully I'll keep every presentation short. So this is an informal amendment request to, as the chair said, the Lower Atkinson Community Improvement Project. The request is for $231,588.94. Last year, there was a request for a comprehensive park improvement project, which included the playground as well as some accessibility and parking and safety issues. That was a very large ask that we then broke out into separate phases. So the committee approved phase 1 last year. That was for the universally accessible playground, which is under construction. It's nearly complete. And we'd like to formally request a portion of phase 2 tonight. Would you like me to stop there, Chair?
Yes, thank you. As this is essentially an out of sequence ask, and it's not an emergency ask, it's a little bit of a hybrid because it's a part and parcel of the last cycle. I'd like to get a sense from the committee, whether they wish to hear this application with this current cycle. So I'll take, a motion to hear it.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, in a second. Okay. Now, discussion. Motion's on the floor to hear this. Any discussion from the committee?
I think it's appropriate, especially given the they took off the fountain project last week. That might have loosened up some funding, so I think it's appropriate to take this evening.
Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, by a show of hands, all those in favor of the motion to hear this application? Thank you. Kim, you may proceed.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to give a very brief history for those that were not here last year. So Lower Atkinson Common, also known as the Pioneer Fields, is a very heavily used park. It's located on Merrimack Street between Moulton and Plummer. It is the home of the Pioneer League, which is where it gets its second name, Pioneer Fields. The Community Action School, which is a Head Start school, is on the corner of Plummer and Merrimack, and they actually use the playground at this park for their school facilities. Last week, you heard me talk about the Stone Tower Restoration Project at Upper Atkinson. This is all part of the same parcel, but really people differentiate Upper Atkinson and Lower Atkinson. So tonight I'm focusing just on Lower Atkinson, which really is sort of the active recreation portion of the park. It includes 3 ball fields, a basketball court, a playground, a clubhouse, which acts as a storage shed and a snack shack. There's very limited parking at the park right now, which really limits the accessibility to the park. Currently, there's only about 55 spaces at the park, and the danger here is that a lot of the spaces that you can see in this photograph are angled on Merrimack Street, so cars are forced to back out into traffic, which creates some safety concerns. Next slide, please. In 2020, the Parks Commission approved a master plan for the entire Lower Atkinson Park project. It really has 3 phases. The first phase was to relocate that playground to the core or the heart of the park. And again, that was approved by this body last year for $525,000. That playground will be completed this spring. Again, it's universally accessible, so it allows children of all abilities to play together. What that did is it loosened up the ability to remove the existing playground, which is currently along Merrimack Street, which would then make room for phase 2 of the project, which is what we're talking about tonight, to move the parking that's currently on the street internal to the park where that existing tot lot exists right now. We also intend to alleviate the drainage problems throughout Lower Atkinson Park and make the park more accessible, both with ADA parking spaces as well as queuing for parents dropping children off at the park, and there is a drop off for a bus. We're also including bike racks. We're adding a significant amount of shade trees to the center of the park to again make the park more accessible and inviting during the summer months. And that's really what we're discussing tonight. The full scope of that phase 2 is 584. 730. We're asking for roughly half of that with a very specific scope that really aligns with the CPC's mission from you. And then we're asking for the other half from ARPA, and that request has gone into the city council packet for Monday night. The future phase, which is phase 3, will be to renovate the existing basketball court that's just behind the new playground. And make that a multi-purpose sport court, but that is going to be happening down the road. Next slide, please. So again, just a brief overview, we're going to be taking all of the parking off of the street and safely relocating it inside the park. So we're going to go from roughly 55 parking spaces to 72 parking spaces. 4 of those will be ADA accessible, and then as I said, with queuing and a bus drop off, again, making the park far more accessible than it is right now for those visitors. We're also including a sidewalk from Moulton to Plummer. And again, improving the drainage throughout the park. There's a significant amount of native plantings that are being installed here, and that's to handle and take the curse off some of the drainage issues of the park, as well as bike racks, a pathway, some safety netting, which was also included in phase one. This is for a different field, and again, those shade plantings to improve accessibility of the park. Next slide, please. And Caitlin, if you can just sort of, what I wanted to show here what the three different phases are. So the new playground, which is just to the left of Pepe Field, which is the bottom right field, yes, that triangular area. That whole area there is the new universally accessible playground, which is being installed currently. The phase two that we're talking about now with the parking is both along Merrimack Street. It's a one-way vehicular pattern for parents to either drop off children, or the ADA spaces are to the rear of that parking lot, or to pull into the gravel lot, which is along the left-hand side of the property. I won't get into the specifics of the drainage, but there's significant improvements in terms of swales and catch basins and that sort of a thing to prevent pooling. And then you can see the substantial amount of shade plantings throughout sort of the center portion of the park and along the edges, as well as some street trees down along Merrimack Street. Next slide, please. I'm not going to really discuss this, but it just goes to show some of the native plantings that are being introduced here. There's things such as red oaks, red maples, tulip trees, blue flag iris, cardinal flower, low bush blueberry viburnum. So a nice mix of native plantings there, both for habitat and for stormwater management. Next slide, please. So this is the full scope of the project, and the areas that are highlighted in blue are what we're specifically asking for from the CPC. And again, these are aligned with the mission of the CPC. So that is the parking, which will improve accessibility to the park. It is netting along one of the ball fields to prevent balls from, errantly flying towards pedestrians and vehicles, bike racks, new pathway, and plantings. The portion that we're requesting from ARPA is the city sidewalk, the drainage, and some of those other more utilitarian pieces. And again, the total request here is $231,588.94. Next slide, please. And that's it, really. This has gone through a very substantial public process. We had site plan review with planning board. We had conservation commission review for notice of intent. We had just a lot of community input and a lot of interest in this project. So I'm going to hold it there and allow any questions.
I appreciate your having removed from this ask the sidewalk portion. That's always sticky, or CPC money. Are there any questions from the committee? Yes.
I have a quick question. One of the ball fields down there, I think it's Pepe Field, where they play softball, has significant pooling
Yes.
drainage issue. Will that be
Yes.
remediated during this?
Yes.
Great.
A couple of questions. Right now there's like arboretum planted along, arborvitae,
Yes.
sorry, planted along the, where the new parking lot is going. And formerly a parent of a kid on that field, that thing is very nice to block the
Yeah.
traffic and I'm just seeing some sparsely planted trees. I'm also just, the idea of, I'm questioning the term safely placing the parking. It's safer for who? Safer for drivers or safer for people walking?
Both. So first of all, the arborvitae that are being removed, there are new arborvitae planted just between the field on the left and
Okay, with that.
yeah,
the
so
bump out
a
of
new hedge of arborvitae is being
Okay.
introduced there. That was a request from the neighborhood, as well as the shade trees along Merrimack Street. So we sort of had to balance, people wanted both, so we included both. And really, again, right now, the existing condition is angled parking on Merrimack Street. So you're dropping off your child and then you're backing into
Right.
the traffic, and children that are exiting from their parents' vehicles are also mingling with cars that are pulling in off of a very busy street.
Yeah.
So what this allows is, a car coming in one direction, so just past the clubhouse, it's a one-way. And you're either making a turn and you're angling back, to park the car, with your nose pointed at Merrimack Street, or you're queuing to the right of where that,
Right.
I should go up there and point to this.
No, I
Okay.
understand.
And you're dropping your child off on the correct side of the car immediately into the park on a sidewalk, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think where my question is more coming from is, a moral, ethical thing of building, spots for cars at all. I think investing in cars is a bad idea. And I think if anything that should happen, there should be some major street calming after, traffic calming happening on that street. I just don't know that spending our money on parking spots is something I feel morally obliged to do. I guess that's my only other question.
Just to make a comment, and I guess I do not have a baseball or softball player. I do, however, have 2 soccer players, and I wish there was an easy way to drop kids off at Cherry Hill, because there isn't. It's just you're dropping them off into chaos most of the time, and it doesn't really matter because my kids are older, but when they were younger, there isn't a natural place to drive through. There's the circle, but so I see your point on the cars. I just, I think that from having driven, I drive this way to get home a lot, and there are just so many cars there all the time, and I would love to think that there aren't going to be cars, but with the amount of young children that practice there, I think there naturally are a lot, and a way to get them off of backing out of the street for me. I'm glad that you've done it that way.
And if I could, sorry, through the chair, if I could just speak briefly as, in my capacity as Director of Planning and Development, I also was, involved in seeing the planning board's review of the project, and that was a focus of discussion for the planning board was pedestrian and traffic safety and so forth, and, so I just wanted to mention in both that context and in, several years, I would say at least, of traffic safety advisory committee meetings when we talk about this particular section of the street. I think the first step obviously is to get some of those cars, the sort of backing out movements off the street. And again, every member has to come to their own conclusion as to what makes sense, but I definitely would support the, and I think it fulfills some of what you're trying to get at, maybe, I completely understand the about cars as a land use planner, but at the same time, I think here it's ideally, it's going to help that traffic situation by providing more of an organized fashion for the vehicles, and the drop-off spot was discussed in particular, as well as the sidewalk connectivity and getting the cars off the street. Then we can have basically better sort of bike lane sort of designation, which addresses, I think.
I think for me, it's the fact that we're adding more parking spots. Is it gonna create kind of an induced demand for people? Because you can get to that, and it would be better if we could bike there, walk there, and when most people are gonna be using it, it's gonna be good enough weather to do that. And, a lot of people come in from the back way down the kind of gravel path that's not really maintained, and, I think it would be better to spend money doing something with that than encouraging more cars. Just my point.
I go by there a lot, because I live in that neighborhood down there, and, unsafe and chaotic situation when they've got 3 games going on there, and kids of different ages, and their families and their grandparents, the demand is already there, and I think we're probably not encouraging more use. I think we're meeting the existing demand and making it safer, but that's my experience there.
Yeah, I can't think of a worse situation in the city of Newburyport, with the possible exception of pulling out on the 3 roads up there, with driving in Newburyport than backing out of those parking spots. And it's a miracle. I think people do get in accidents down there. It's a miracle that it hasn't been worse. So I think it's a great plan. Just having people not back out into traffic is a good thing.
Yes,
Kim, I have a question about the overall budget. This is half, you're asking for half of this phase, and the other half, requesting from city.
From ARPA.
Through ARPA, and that's Monday?
Monday. It'll go in, it'll be received by the council, but it will go immediately into committee for discussion.
I wish we all had a crystal ball, but just in case that isn't successful, what happens to this project?
We would have to find an alternative funding source. You know, there's been a question, can we ask for more from CPC? But as far as I understand, mass law won't allow you to pay for city sidewalks. So I think that's not an option here. But we would have to find alternative funding. You know, the request from ARPA is a substantial amount. I think we could get a lot of it done. It would be unfortunate to not be able to build the sidewalks. You know, if we get this project done and not be able to do the sidewalks, I think it'd be unfortunate. So we'll try to figure out a way to make it happen.
So are you saying that if CPC, if this were recommended, and it passed, and you received the funds from us, you'd still be able to do a portion of the project, or will it just be, okay?
Yeah,
so
we
it
wouldn't be
won't
able to do the drainage and the sidewalk, the city sidewalk. But the portion, if this were approved, we could do the parking areas, the plantings,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Kim, do you know whether, what the status of, last year's 525 is?
Yes, so that's included in the budget, so, not all invoices have been paid yet because they're poured in place, surfacing hasn't gone in yet, and the fencing hasn't gone in yet, but we think there's going to be roughly a $40,000 surplus, which I've included in the budget numbers, that's already been accounted for here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you just rolling that into phase 2?
We're hoping to roll that into phase 2, yes, which I think is another formal request from
Yes,
you.
yes,
Yes,
yes, please, but
Thank
it
you.
is in the budget. Yeah.
yes.
Okay, and I assume that this 15-foot ball netting was not part of last year, of phase 1.
There was a 15-foot ball netting in phase 1 for, Pepe Fields.
Okay, that's the field next to the playground.
Next to the playground,
Okay.
correct, and this is for the other
The other
field
field.
along Merrimack, which I think is,
Okay.
Founder's Field.
Founder's Field.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions in the room? Any members of the public like to speak that are here? Any members of the public attending on Zoom would like to speak, please raise your hand. Are there other hands raised?
No,
Okay. No other questions? Thank you.
thank you.
Next, presentation we have is the Woodman Park basketball, court. City of Newburyport and Parks Commission, $98,563. Kim, you're on it.
All right. Take a breath here. Okay, this is another phase 2 project. You heard us request this last year. There was a portion, the Woodman Park accessibility project was approved by the CPC last year to make some improvements to the accessibility of the existing playground. This is phase 2 of Woodman Park restorations, which includes the sport court restoration project. Next slide, please. Again, very brief history. Woodman is the only park that is located in the west end of the city. It's a 10.4 acre parcel that was that's located at the end of Crow Lane that was donated by the family of John Woodman many years ago. Next slide, please. Again, last year, CPC approved just over $57,500 for an accessibility project for the playground. So playground does not look like that anymore. The plastic edging is gone. The stairs are gone. There is regrading that has occurred. There's going to be sort of like a switchback ramp there. The walkway still needs to be completely installed, but it will allow folks with mobility issues or in mobility devices to be able to, enter the playground from the parking lot, which is right in the foreground of this photograph. Again, it's under construction. I would say it's more than halfway done at this point, and it should be wrapped up this coming season. Next slide, please. The breakdown of the request for the costs, we had Pinterest Associates put together a quote for us, and the full amount is $98,563.80. Next slide, please. This is images of the current report. This is going to have to be a complete overhaul, so the existing pavement will need to be removed and the entire thing will have to be repaved. It really has outlived its useful life, and there's not any more chances for just sort of skim coating or resurfacing it in place. It's going to have to be completely redone. Next slide, please. And along with that are some opportunities to update this. Next slide, please. And I won't go too much into detail here, but again, in terms of public benefit, it's the only park in the west end of the city, heavily used by residents, especially neighbors in that part of the city. Will provide an opportunity for safe, attractive, active and passive recreational opportunities for the community, and improving our recreational spaces. Next slide, please. And that's just an overview of where Woodman Park is, if you're not familiar with it. Again, it's in a pro lane, but runs alongside the I-95 corridor. And that's, any questions?
Questions from the committee? I have one. Do you know what the recommended maintenance program is for this new type of surface they're gonna put down?
The basketball court
The
surface?
basketball surface, is there, whether it comes with a, you need to fill the cracks every so often and things like that?
I don't know the specifics. I could get back to you on that, but it's my understanding that the surface should last for a good amount of time. I don't know that there's need for annual, maintenance of cracks or anything like that, but I could get more information for you if there's something specific.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I know that, in large measure, unfortunately, this park has been the poor relation when it comes to upkeep.
Yeah, it
And-
definitely hasn't seen an awful lot of TLC
Yeah.
for a while.
I for one would sure like to see that, that a maintenance program is put together and published and funded annually, so that we're not replacing as often. The upkeep is extending the life of these improvements that we're putting in. Any questions? Any questions from members of the public? Any questions from members of the public attending on Zoom? No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Am I staying for the next one?
Okay, next one is In Street and Patrick Tracy Square restoration. City of Newburyport and Parks Commission, $246,000.
All right. All right, so thanks again. This is, again, the In Street Patrick Tracy Square brick and granite rehabilitation project. Next slide, please. For those that are not aware, this In Street is the epicenter of the urban renewal initiative that began in the mid-1970s. That picture is a picture of what In Street once looked like before urban renewal. And where those were once vacant buildings, now it's sort of the core of our downtown retail center and our park space. In Street, Patrick Tracy Square, which is at the top end of In Street on Pleasant Street, and also Market Square, which is at the bottom of In Street on Water Street and Merrimack, are our downtown urban parks. So important to the vibrancy of our downtown. They are, again, showing their age. They've been around for a while. Next slide, please. There's some images of what they look like today. There's an awful lot of bricks that are loose and up, causing tripping hazards, that sort of a thing. So this project seeks to repair, reset, and possibly replace some of the bricks and the granite stairs through these three parks, or two parks rather, in order to improve accessibility And I will note, since we're on the topic of phase two, I seem to be saying that a lot tonight. Last year, CPC did approve, the replacement of the post lights in Street and Patrick Tracy Square, with LED lights to improve visibility and accessibility. So this is sort of piggybacking on that initiative to improve accessibility in our downtown urban parks. Next slide, please. What this shows is sort of a breakdown of each one of the areas that we're focusing on. So the first area is the Byron's Court, which is just immediately off of Green Street. And that scope and cost estimate is $74,500. Then the area immediately behind the One Sphera restaurant is $115,250. And then Patrick Tracy Square is $56,250. So there is an opportunity here to piece out each of these sections as individual projects, if that were something that the CPC wanted to consider. Next slide, please. In terms of public benefit, again, these are the parks that are our urban downtown parks. They do provide respite from the urban environment. They are tree-lined, and they provide a pedestrian connection between Pleasant Street and the waterfront. We are seeking to improve their accessibility year-round, which is in keeping with the goals of providing safe, attractive parks that preserve our historic resources and provide a range of active and passive recreational opportunities. Next slide, please. This is just an overhead view of where those three areas are that I just discussed. So again, right off of the Green Street parking lot, that's Byron's Court, which is outlined in a red rectangle. A little to the north of that is the area that was behind the former Vera. That's another plaza area that we have the scope of work and cost estimate for, and then Patrick Tracy Square is on the opposite side of Pleasant Street at the bottom end of In Street. So if there's any questions on this one, I'm happy to answer them.
Just want to confirm that these are considered park properties and controlled by the.
They're controlled by the Parks Commission division, yes.
Questions or comments?
From the upper area section of that, is that talking about that upper elevated section?
Yes.
Okay,
So the center portion is the fountain. This is one level below that
Right.
before you get to the back of those shops.
where there's several missing bricks in the wall.
Yep,
Yeah,
and the
okay, yeah.
hemlock, the honey locust trees are in that area as well.
Right. Thank you.
Jamie?
Yeah, just real quick, since we have more, requests than we actually have funds, it's probably helpful to break it out by sections, when we do the deliberations.
Yes. We often have to do that.
Yeah, but if they wanna, they could just break it down for us, that would be good.
Right. Yes, Jane.
Kim, was there ever any discussion of using the streets and sidewalks funds that are being dispersed throughout the city, making it so much better in certain areas? Was there ever any consideration using those funds for this area?
Unfortunately, I think the streets and sidewalks fund unfortunately doesn't stretch as far as we would like it to, because there are so many streets and sidewalks that need to be taken care of. That I think on the streets and sidewalks plan, these areas aren't located on them because they're parks, they're not sidewalks. So I would say at this point in time, they're not considered for that funding.
Questions? Members of the public, any questions or comments? Members of the public tuning in by Zoom, any questions or comments? Please raise your hand. No questions. Thank you, Kim. Next up, we have Rail Trail Master Plan, City of Newburyport Office of Planning and Development, $75,000. Jordy, welcome. Hello.
All right, just like to quickly go through some slides here with Caitlin's help. So that's just a locus map showing the approximately 50-acre parcel that was conveyed to the city a number of years ago by the state, where the old northbound section of I-95 used to be, and the roadbed is still there today. Next slide. This slide just shows the interconnection of this Brown Heart Trail with the Regional Coastal Trails Network. I've circled that in the red there, but it's just to the south of the so-called Garrison Trail, which runs up along I-95 and across the river and connects in with our neighboring communities. We've been working for a couple of decades on networking this regional trails network, and which is really come together in a beautiful way. Next slide, please. This is a picture of this 40-foot wide old asphalt roadbed that's down there. As I noted, it's essentially 2 lanes and shoulders of this abandoned section, the northbound section of I-95. And it's over a mile long down there. Next slide, please. One thing that I don't think I emphasized in the package was there's a lot of room down here, and there's a lot of room. This is the kind of thing that gets sorted out in a design process and with public engagement, but there's a lot of room for having the potential to separate the bicycle versus the pedestrian treadways. I've been hearing over the years, multi-use pathways always have built-in friction associated with the fact that you're having bicyclists sharing spaces with pedestrians, and sometimes there can be conflicts, especially as those corridors get busier and busier. With the advent of e-bikes, that's become a little bit more of an issue. So there are complaints about multi-use pathways, even though they're highly popular. And one way to address that is to actually have within the same corridor separated bike and pedestrian treadways. So you have 8 feet or something like that in between those facilities. Pedestrians are on one side and bicyclists on the other. So that's an opportunity here, which we really didn't have in most of the Clipper City Rail Trail. So it'd be a new type of recreational opportunity we could offer. Next slide, please, Kate. This is just showing some of the existing conditions. That's one of the box culverts. There's 4 box culverts in the Little River, the winding Little River, underneath the old highway. Those box culverts seem, just from a quick visual look, to be in pretty good shape. Next slide, please. There's a picture looking inside at the box culvert section of the river. Next slide. And that's a view of the Little River. It is a little river, but it's an interesting feature for anyone in this vicinity. Next slide, please. There's existing drainage infrastructure. Probably a good deal of it is a bit clogged now. This has received essentially no maintenance for decades, but these catch basins and drainage pipes and so forth are there in place. Next slide. There's some interesting rocky outcrops along the trail. So it's a very flat trail, but there's some interesting topography and other natural features. Next slide, please. The remnants of the old highway. There are these old rusting kind of cable guardrails, which should be removed for pedestrian and bicyclist use. Next slide. The pavement's old, and in some places trees and other vegetation are starting to poke their way through. Next slide, please. The asphalt is it's kind of amazing it's held up this long, but there's certainly a lot of cracking, surface cracking going on that pavement. Next slide. A couple places there's some odd little protrusions, such as this one where There is a bit of a trip hazard, this is like an old sign that was cut in the middle of roadway, something added after the roadway was abandoned. Next slide. Volunteers got money to add on this marsh overlook platform. There's some interesting, views along there. Next slide. At either end, the northern end and the southern end, there's the stone dust pathways, coming down from Story Ave. This is, the asphalt was removed from the asphalt plant. But, so the stone dust is not in great shape. There's a fair amount of erosion, going on there. Next slide, please. And when it's wet, there are some areas that get pretty slick and slippery. So that's not a great condition for, pedestrians and bicyclists. Next slide, please. There is, the existing dirt trailhead up there off of Story Avenue. That's also experiencing a fair amount of, ponding and rutting and so forth. Next slide. This is down on Hale Street. So similarly, with runoff, the stone dust parking area there is experiencing, some problems. Next slide. There's sort of a right angle turn currently at the southern end of the trail to get back up to the grade of Hale Street. And there's some very significant invasive vegetation there, which completely blocks that, sight line. So that's a bit of an issue, a safety issue that needs to be addressed. Next slide. And finally, so it is a 40-foot swath of asphalt. Some volunteers, there's a long story here, which I won't go into, but some volunteers scraped away the soil on either side of, and sort of spread a couple of inches of dirt out on either side to make it look a little bit more like the Clipper City Rail Trail with that sort of 10 or 12-foot width. But the asphalt is actually all still there underneath. And the Conservation Commission had expressed some significant concerns about the impacts to the resource areas there. But if nothing else, that gives an idea of what the portions of the trail look like today. Next slide, please. Scope. We need to have a consultant work with us to do a more thorough inventory and assessment of all these conditions, including pavement cores and so forth. We need topographic and boundary survey work. We'd like to have public engagement through a couple of public meetings. Focus on the delineation of the environmental resources and figure out a permitting approach, and then get into our design alternatives, identifying the pros and cons of the different ways we could improve this area, and figuring out some ballpark cost estimates and getting some conceptual plans together. I called it a master plan for purposes of this CPA application. We have a grant application into Mass Trails for essentially a matching amount, another $100,000, which the CPA grant would be helping to leverage. The Mass Trails grant requires a match. And so that would get us a nice distance towards the preliminary plans. Next slide, please. I'm not going to read all these, but it meets multiple CPC criteria, a project like this. Next slide, please. As I just noted, the CPA grant will really help leverage other funding sources, and currently we have this pending Mass Trails grant request, and the Coastal Trails Coalition has also granted a $5,000 batch towards this project. Next slide. Was that the last slide? Last slide, okay. So that's, hopefully that didn't take too long, but that's the presentation.
What do you think the total cost might be for the plan and through the design?
Is really impossible to know at this early stage. So, you know, if we follow a similar path to what we did with the rail trail, that means, you know, seeking state and federal transportation funding to actually build the project. They do require more from us than we would, or if we were just doing the project ourselves. So some of those junction points, as you start off on a project, we'll have to figure out. So at this early planning stage, that's the time to sort of figure out what's the scope of this project. And so, for instance, when we did the section of trail along the wastewater treatment plant along the Merrimack River, we were straddling that junction. We were saying, are we gonna go for Mass DOT transportation funding? We eventually got an MVP grant which funded that, and we had to do less design. So I don't have a good answer to that until we sort of get into it more.
Other questions or comments from the committee? Yes, Andrew.
Do you know what the timing is for finding out about the mass trails?
Sometime this summer.
Okay.
Jordy, sorry, I might have just not heard you, but so CPA funds can be used as leverage for other funding sources, but as the mass trails, would it be used, would be required for matching funds for that grant, or
In
is that
order-
grant standalone?
Yes, so in order to get the Mass Trails grant, the city would have to come up with some match funding from somewhere.
Okay.
So, you know, in this case, the model would be that the CPA funding would be the match for the Mass Trails. The Coastal Trails Coalition grant is helpful along those lines. And for Mass Trails, I can offer my hours as, you know, as match. But in order to try to, you know, get that full amount, we would have to have some funding from the CPA. The Mass Trails grant would essentially just help move that design process, you know, further down the road. If we don't get it, we can still do a significant amount of this preliminary planning work, just can't get as far with schematic plans.
What is the percentage match required for the match?
If the 20, I think it's 20%. Yeah.
Jamie, question?
That's what I was gonna ask.
Okay. Any members of the public, questions or comments? Any members of the public attending by Zoom, questions or comments, please raise your hand. No questions. Thank you, Jordan. All right. Next, we have William Lloyd Garrison, interpretive sign panel replacement, City of Newburyport, Office of Planning and Development, $2,265.
It's a rather small request, and so I'll try to quickly go through this. There's the locus map showing Brown Square. Next slide, please. And just an image of Brown Square with the Garrison statue and the Garrison interpretive signs, with the sign in question in the foreground there. Next slide. William Lloyd Garrison, probably all of you know, but he's quite a historical figure of national and international significance. We now have you know, Garrison Week in December, where he gets celebrated locally and regionally. This interpretive sign, which was put in 2011, this focuses on his specific connections growing up, being born and growing up here in Newburyport. Next slide. Just a picture of some folks engaging with that sign. Next slide, please. The sign it was installed in 2011. The panel is called high pressure laminate sign. But this one is experiencing some significant delamination, as you can see along the top there. Most of the high pressure laminate signs seem to be doing pretty well, but for whatever reason, this one is not, and it's past its 10-year warranty period. Next slide, please. And a couple of other views of that delamination along the top. Next slide, please. One other note is that there's an inset image of Harrison's birthplace, this house on School Street. And since the sign was done over a decade ago, there was a pretty significant restoration and reconstruction of that house, which now is a historically accurate chimney and different siding and so forth. So it's an opportunity to replace that image with a current one. Next slide, please. There's my little mock-up dropping in, my photo of the house as it looks today. We need to have Arrow Street, the graphic artist, just drop in the sign, drop in the inset photo, get a camera ready, and a file that we can then take to the sign maker. Next slide, or is that the last slide? Yeah, so obviously a fairly small request, it seems on point, and that's the presentation.
Questions or comments from the committee? Questions or comments from the public? Questions or comments from the public attending by Zoom? Please raise your hand. No questions. Thank you, Jordan. Next, we have the Central Waterfront Boardwalk Reconstruction Feasibility Study, City of Newburyport Office of Planning and Development, $75,000.
Last one for me. So again, I'll try to zip through these slides. I think all of us know where the boardwalk is, but there it is on the locus map. Next slide. This is focused on the whole boardwalk, essentially. Next slide. The boardwalk's I think is obvious, but always wise maybe to spell it out. It's really one of our primary civic spaces. Next slide. Gets very high use, particularly in the summertime. Next slide. The different sections have different character. This is the eastern section, showing some of the visiting boaters along the floats there. Next slide. In the embayment area, where the boardwalk is considerably wider. Next slide. And then the tour boat section over on the west. Next slide. And then special events like the tall ships coming in can attract quite large crowds. Next slide. The boardwalk is aging. It was installed in 2002, so that's almost a quarter century ago. And it was reconstructed then with these IPA planks. Next slide, please. 3-inch by 8-inch IPA planks, tropical hardwood. Most of that tropical hardwood seems to be in pretty good shape, but there are some sort of glaring examples of where it's not in good shape. Next slide, please. I looked at this informally with a marine contractor. The boardwalk certainly seems structurally sound, and that's certainly something we could get confirmed as needed. Next slide, please. But the issue is that there are a growing number of trip hazards and accessibility challenges due to the deterioration of some of these boards. Next slide. I don't think that duct tape is still there, but someone literally duct taped a portion of our boardwalk, which I thought was ironically amusing. Next slide, please. Some of the boards have this flaking and splintering going on, which is difficult to repair or remedy. Next slide. In some areas, someone at some point attempted concrete patches in some of these areas. And I think that those concrete patches, you can still see some of them if you look for them, have actually made it a little bit worse, with retaining moisture in the timbers. Next slide, please. Some of the planks have warped and started to pull up. And, I think it's a good guess that the stringer beams down below, which were reused a quarter century ago, are probably not in great shape and are just not, sufficient to hold down the fasteners for some of these planks. Next slide, please. There has been attempts at annual maintenance by the Waterfront Trust and the city's DPS, but it does not appear to be sufficient to keep up with these issues. Next slide, please. Another component of this is sea level rise and looking ahead. We're thinking a lot about sea level rise these days as we focus on the waterfront park expansion, as we focus on the bulkhead project. If and when the boardwalk gets rebuilt, something to think about at least is, do we rebuild it where it is for now? Or do we try to elevate it and to head off flooding, such as what we recently experienced earlier this year. Next slide, please. Boardwalks, this boardwalk can certainly withstand flooding without much harm, but it does take away from people's ability to use the boardwalk and it's underwater. Next slide, please. There are a lot of complications to elevating the boardwalk, so it's something we're going to have to think about thoroughly. One of the issues is an elevated boardwalk is connected with a lot of other elements. Plazas, the new multi-use pathways that Andy's project is building across their other pathways connecting. All these elements would have to figure out how to have accessible transitions, which is certainly a complicating challenge. Next slide, please. So there are a lot of alternatives to analyze depending on a lot of different factors. How significant a consultant and the public and the leadership and the rest of us think problems are. So it ranges from, trying to really have a better maintenance approach, which could extend the life of the existing boardwalk and just deal with the specific wards where we have issues. And then going through the gamut of sort of partial reconstruction at the existing footprint and existing elevation versus elevated, all the way up to full reconstruction, potentially at a higher elevation. So there's a lot to sort through in terms of pros and cons and cost estimates and the rest of it. Next slide, please. There's a couple of places where there's been patches done just with, I think, some pressure treated wood. So if there's just a maintenance approach, we may see more of that in terms of kind of Frankenstein approach with new boards going there that aren't necessarily if they would. If we're looking at it for either partial or more full reconstruction approaches, there's a lot of different decking materials to consider. The Purple Heart tropical hardwood, for instance, in the boardwalk connecting Cashman Park to the rail trail seems to actually be holding up much better than the IPA. There's a lot of other materials, composites and bamboo and other things, all of which have various different pros and cons. So something else a consultant could help us sort through. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the general scope of what we have in mind here is really getting a thorough assessment done, including the subsurface stringers and what's going on below the boardwalk, having public meetings, identifying these various alternatives and analyzing them and defining the pros and cons and documenting this so that we can have a lot of good information to work with In addition to having, at least ballpark cost estimates, some idea of the permitting implications, and move towards a recommended approach for how we would address boardwalk. Is that the last slide? Yeah, okay, so there we go.
Questions or comments from the committee? Yes, Jane?
Jordy, you showed a number of photos of the flooding, and I'm very familiar with that issue being so involved in the city with climate resiliency.
Yeah.
And climate models are showing there's no reason for us to not expect that to continue.
Yeah. It's inevitable.
Person.
Yeah.
The current improvements to the bulkhead where it is being raised, do you see that that's at least a shorter term, midterm solution to this flooding that's being experienced or not?
The bulkhead, in itself with raising up these walls is not sufficient in itself to prevent flooding. There's always going to be gaps and the ends encircling flooding to encircle. So we have not created a wall that's going to keep the river out. It's part of our sort of incremental move to adapting and, our resilience to the raising river levels. So that's a slightly long-winded way of saying, unfortunately, no, bulkhead itself is not going to address this particular issue. If in another parallel universe, we were maybe doing all this at once, the waterfront park, the bulkhead, and an elevated boardwalk, but that would be a little bit too much for us to fight off and chew. So, we just need to, part of what we need to think through as a community with some professional assistance is knowing that sea level rise is coming and knowing that eventually this boardwalk will have to be raised. Is this something we should do right now? Or do we say, let's keep it going as it is and we'll push that project off for 10 years, 15 years, whatever it might be. That's part of what we need to think through. Before I thought through this more, my initial feeling was, well, of course, we're gonna raise the boardwalk. It is definitely a complicated and costly endeavor, given all those connections. The boardwalk does not exist in that. So, that's just part of the need to have a focused process to think all this through and then figure out what our preferred alternative.
Thank you. I have another question. We talked about maintenance, and anyone that's walked down there, you really have to watch where you're going, because you may flop down. Is it waterfront, the waterfront trust and DPS are both responsible
Yeah, so
for maintenance?
there's a very, very long and tortuous story, which I will not really get into behind that, but Newburyport is unique in the world with the way our waterfront is owned and managed. We have this quasi-public Newburyport Waterfront Trust, which was set up a few decades ago, which, has a rotating board of trust members assigned by the mayor, but is independent from the city. It's called quasi-public. So by custom and by deed, the Waterfront Trust is responsible for the boardwalk, but at the same time, the city is responsible for upkeep. Sometimes in situations like these, it's a little bit of a tragedy of the commons, maybe. If you have various people who are responsible, then it's hard. It can be hard to get things completely done. Well, Andy wants to jump in.
All right, through the chair, I would add, and Jordan and I have worked for years and have dealt with, the various different intricacies of the Waterfront Trust. And I would just add to that, it's pretty obvious that given the Waterfront Trust documents, the city ultimately is still responsible for the costs associated with improvements down there. So in one way or the other, we're gonna have to put this infrastructure and, again, it still falls back to the city, so to speak. The trust is, well, it's created as a trust, it's really in the large part of the arm of the city, essentially the way it's created, so. Members appointed by the city, funds, essentially by the city, and then the land in perpetuity for the general public, in the same capacity. So in essence, it's also gonna come back to the city to take care of those things.
I would just add that even if what we end up with is sort of a more robust annual maintenance approach, which is sort of a possibility along this spectrum of options, the Waterfront Trust and our DPS does need assistance in figuring out what is the best way to deal with this boardwalk and this situation and these particular deteriorating boards. Right now, the sort of budgets and know-how and so forth aren't really there. We need to have a concerted effort to figure out what's our best practices, what's our approach to this.
Would that be part of the feasibility study?
That's definitely part of it.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the committee? Questions or comments from members of the public? Questions or comments from members of the public attending by Zoom, please raise your hand. No questions. Thank you, Jordan.
All right, thank you.
We have knock tennis courts, phase 2. Newburyport Public Schools, $476,140.
Again, I'm here presenting on behalf of the Newburyport Schools. I have Kyle Hudson, the athletic director, here with me tonight. So thank you again for your time. I wanted to start by saying that court space is very tough to come by in Newburyport, as anyone who is a tennis player, pickleball player, or any of the above knows. Last year, the city was approached by the Friends of Newburyport Tennis with just sort of a grassroots effort to try to get more court space in the city. Currently, right now, the Newburyport high school teams play at Atkinson Common. There are not enough courts there for them to host a tournament, and it's a little bit far from the schools. 2 courts were built at the Knockmullen schools a couple years ago, and those are wildly successful. And so tonight, the proposal is simply to expand upon that recent success and expand the number of courts that are at the Knockmullen. The site that we are proposing is that larger blue square. It's an underutilized portion of school property. It was previously a softball field. It's no longer being used in that capacity. And as you can see from the green box and the arrows, there's still ample space in that location for PE classes and practice space for the teams. This proposal is supported by the mayor, the superintendent, middle school principal, the athletic director, obviously, and many community members, some of which are here tonight. Next slide, please. So the scope of work is fairly straightforward. The old softball backstop, which you see on these pictures, will be removed. And what these photos show is that the space is very flat, so it's very conducive for expanding the tennis courts in this location. Next slide, please. This is a very conceptual plan that was put together by Huntress Associates. It just shows, so the right-hand side, the 2 courts, those are the existing courts that are just recently installed. And this shows a configuration of 3 potential new tennis courts. There is a grade change between the existing courts and the new courts, so there would be a small retaining wall that would be elevating, holding back the grades to keep the new courts, 1 level above the existing courts, and there's a little viewing platform or patio space that's being proposed there. Part of the scope of this work is to further the investigation, to see that this is a viable plan. It's possible that 3 courts might not fit here, so this might get reduced down to 2, but for now we are including 3 courts as our scope of work. And I just want to let Kyle say a couple of words here, if you don't mind, about the use of the.
Speak here, or do you?
Either way.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to talk, and we're very fortunate and thankful for the 2 courts that were put in last year was the first year we started to use them. It did help our two tennis teams. We've seen an increase in popularity at the high school level with both boys and girls. Our girls have been strong in numbers, mid-40s for many years now. Our boys program actually disbanded a couple of years ago, and we sent our few tennis players that we had over to Triton and we co-opted with them. We are now back fully as a Newburyport team, mid-20s numbers. And I see that trend continuing, mainly because of the youth clinics, both at the racket club and also at the new courts right now. If you go by there in the summer, you'll see lots of instruction in younger people using those courts. So that's the goal. So not enough courts for the popularity is one of the issues that we have. Thinking 60 to 70 tennis players trying to play on right now 5 courts, 3 at Atkinson and the 2 here. But what really brought this to light was the recent success of our girls tennis team the last 2 years. They've won the state championship 2 years in a row. And the MIAA, as Kim said, there's a stipulation in the rules that says you cannot host a home tennis match, a playoff match, if you don't have a minimum of 4 courts. So we've hosted 6 tennis matches at the state level in the last 2 years. And they've had to go, thankfully, Pentucket allowed us to use their facility, and Amesbury allowed us to use their facility for 1 match last year. If we didn't have those options, we would have to travel further. But it would have been a nice benefit for our girls to play at home if they earn that right throughout the year. So with this setup, the 2 and 3 would be ample court time. There's 5 matches that occur at a time. So we could actually play a complete tennis match at the same time, then allow our JVs to play. If we had 4 courts, it is acceptable by the MIA, and we can, it's the time savings is huge. We had a boys tennis match last year, stopped because of daylight. Some of our matches are lasting 3.5 hours. Teams aren't thrilled to come here because it just extends their day so much. A lot of times we see our JV players or varsity players doing homework while they're watching their teammates because it does go until after 7 o'clock. And now with the bus issues, it's starting later. So it's not a good combination right now. So another thing that we can implement with this is PE programs at both the middle school and high school. Since it's now on school grounds, it allows our phys ed programs to utilize this during the school day. Now, if we introduce tennis to at a younger age, now that in theory should continue to generate interest, so our numbers should stay strong at the high school. With this setup here, we could host a home boys and a home girls match on the same day if we wanted to. This allows parking right on site with bathrooms right on site. And they would actually play on the school grounds like many of our other teams do. So this would be a great advantage for those reasons there. This is also a lifetime sport that you can start as young as you want and play as old as you want or can. And it gets used, this will be used, all daylight hours in the summer and when the weather gets better, like those 2 courts are right now. Like I said, if you go by in the summer, you will see people of all ages in there playing. With 2 or 3 additional courts, I think that trend would continue, and we would have continued success, and the boys program will continue to grow. And I just think it's something we're a city that has an indoor racket club. I think obviously it has a tennis presence here, and I think that outdoor courts is something that this city could benefit from. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we just have one more slide to go, just showing the scope and the cost estimates. And Steve Burkholm couldn't be here tonight, but there was a discrepancy, which he indicated. I think he emailed the chair earlier today of about $2,000 for design fees. So the full request is reduced from $476,940 down to $474,560 due to that discrepancy in the design fee. But here is a breakdown of the costs. We do have a gracious donation from Friends of Newburyport Tennis for $21,195, which they raised that just shows support for this project. And we did not include, the 10% contingency, which we normally do, because, after looking at sort of some of the scope of work that Huntress was proposing here, we felt there were some opportunities for value engineering, so we feel confident in that 474,560 number. And that is the extent of that presentation.
Questions or comments from the committee?
Everybody else may know this, but I'm newer. Is it the same contractor that's the last?
Yes.
Yeah. Happy with that.
Yes. You're happy with Huntress?
Yeah.
Very happy.
Yeah, they did a nice job. Questions or comments from members of the public? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name's Josh
Tell us your name,
Bradshaw.
please.
I'm sorry?
Tell us your name, please.
My name's Josh Bradshaw,
Thank you.
and I am here representing Friends of Newburyport Tennis. Just backing up and talking a little bit about what Kim had mentioned. This past fall, we held numerous fundraisers, both online and in person, to kind of stir interest within the community. And we raised over $20,000 from over 100 different donors. So I think that goes a long way to illustrate the level of interest as well as the community buy-in. Some things to take away from that are, many of those donors, or probably a majority of those donors, did not have kids in school. So it was not a matter of parents funding this. It was a matter of tennis players throughout the city that have played for generations. Some old coaches going back many, many years were very excited to see this happening again. That's good, because it was a diverse group of people that were basically putting their money where their mouth was. And I think that's what this donation illustrates, was just the community involvement and support for it. Additionally, what your official position is the athletic, sorry. What he had mentioned as far as the kids going all, different places to have to travel for what should be the home event. I can't recall, but I believe that 75% of the other towns within the league which we're in have the capability of hosting. So it's not an abnormal scenario to ask for all of these things to take place in one spot. And another note is, on the weekends, you can actually drive around to many of these places and try and play, and the courts are full. So you get in your car and you drive across town over here, you find that's not it. It's like whack-a-mole. You try and go back to the other place, that's full. So I think the need is there. So we've gotten through one phase of it, and finishing it off would be a terrific thing. I think another thing is, if done right, this addition could really breathe some life into that section of the Knox School campus. It can really, if you have a lot of kids there playing sports, if there's gonna be some picnic tables and such there, it could be more than just to go and play 2 sets of tennis. It can be, an all-day affair for a lot of kids that are really into the sports, and that's what a lot of kids do now. If they find a spot to go to, they'll stay there for a long time. And it's outdoor activity, getting kids off their phones, getting them away from their computers, getting them out and exercising. So that's a good bit of why all these folks decided to donate the money that we did. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from the public? Questions or comments from the public attending by Zoom, please raise your hand. No questions. Okay, thank you. Next, we have Hill Street Gardens, Newburyport, DPS and Back Bay Neighborhood Association, $35,000.
Hello, everybody.
Hello?
Not Jordy Vining or Kim Turner. Christian Hansen, Karen Bloxton, we're neighbors, we live in the Back Bay neighborhood. We're here as representatives of the Back Bay Neighborhood Association and also Department of Public Services, right? It's not works. Right?
Yes.
Yes. So we're here presenting on Hill Street Gardens, and as we walk through this, we'll talk a little bit about what it is. Karen and I both live in the area, lived there for 10 years, Karen's been there for 30 years, so. I don't want to show our slides apparently. All right, good. So you might be wondering two things. One, what is the Back Bay? Thought it was in Boston. Two, where the heck is the Back Bay? First off, Back Bay neighborhood is named for Boylston Street. Since by Boylston, it has to be Back Bay. It's bordered to the west and the south by Route 1. It's bordered to the east by State Street and to the north by Greenleaf and Pond Street. You can go to the next slide there. We, as a neighborhood association, we do have an official mission statement, and that's essentially to enhance and preserve the quality of life in the portion of Newburyport known as the Back Bay. Now, my personal mission statement is a little bit different. It's much simpler. It's to know who my neighbors are and have them know who I am, so that we can create a community that we all want to live in. See, my son is 13. He's grown up in this neighborhood. He knows all of his neighbors. Karen's two kids grew up here as well. They know all of their neighbors as well. And we think that it's really important to have a very active and engaged community that looks out for one another and is happy where they live. When you're happy where you live, you take care of where you live. You take care of one another. You can go to the next slide. So we do a lot of things as a neighborhood association. We do really want to take care of the jewel of our neighborhood, which is Highland Cemetery. So we've worked with Cleve Woodward to do a headstone straightening. So we've got a group of neighbors get together, donate 2 or 3 hours on the fall afternoon and straighten up headstones. Obviously block parties, we do a toiletry drive and food drive, benefit Pettingill House, our neighbor's table, and the Greater Newbury Elder Pets Fund. Hot chocolate soldiers, we sang poorly this year, doing holiday caroling, and just general neighborhood advocacy. Next slide. This was a shot of us this summer, or excuse me, fall. There were about 13 of us. We got together, we straightened about 15 different headstones, a couple of them which weighed well over a ton. If you've never done it, it's very rudimentary. It requires a lot of stones and crowbars. That's really it, and a lot of teamwork. So we're happy to do that along with Cleve. Next slide, block parties. We have them every year. Generally about 100 people join, and all the food is donated by neighbors. Get together, put it on the table. My job is to make sure the pinata is filled. Next slide, we do toiletry, and like I said, food donations. We've done over 1,000 pounds of food that's been donated over the past 4 years. So that's really wonderful. And then the next slide, the last slide on this portion, is that we've got a long history of social advocacy. You might remember when the windmill went up at the Mark Ritchie woodworking studio down there, and that created a flicker effect. And so we were very vocal as a neighborhood to try and have some resolution to that. It turned out the way that we wanted to, but it's certainly something that we came together as a neighborhood to make our voices be heard. Also to get some parking restrictions in there for commuters who are parking along the streets, who are moving down going down the train and then kind of clogging up that area. And so, we'll go to the next slide here. So here's what we're here to talk about, not Back Bay Neighborhood Association, about the problem that we're seeing. So if you think about the corridor for people who are commuting from the train into downtown, either visitors or commuters, or just people who are going to and from work, they generally get off the train, they walk across Route 1, and they head up Hill Street. And I love it. That's where I live. I love seeing people walk past, but they have to pass this ragged and decrepit fence that serves as generally a backstop for leaves during the fall or a trellis for invasive vines during the summertime. So next slide, please. Our goal here is to remove that fence and relocate it, which would then open up that green space that can be accessible to community members, to commuters, and to visitors. Secondarily, we'd like to put in plantings, native plantings, obviously beautify the space
And then third, we'd like to put up a welcome sign. So as commuters, excuse me, as visitors are joining the city, they're walking up here and they're not greeted with this haggard fence. They're greeted with a welcome to Newburyport sign. Specifics, Karen's gonna talk about that.
Next slide, please. All right, so the proposed location of the removal of the old fence and putting the new fence in is right above the Fulton pit. So there has to be a fence there. It's protecting the public from the Fulton pit. If you could, I don't know if we can do this, but, well, let me just go back up. So you can see that I put arrows there where the pathway is. You're coming from the commuters, railway, downtown, train, walking up there, up Hill Street and down Hill Street, and then making a right on Pond Street, walking to the downtown. Is it possible to go to Google Maps, that link there? You're probably gonna go onto a different, onto the browser though. Try it. Just to have a better idea what it looks like, yeah. So if you can, yeah, just turn it around a little bit. Yeah, that's Hill Street, that's the area we're talking about. And if you turn it all the way around, so you can see the graveyard across the street. Just to have a better idea of where it is. All right, thank you, appreciate that. Okay, so the Fulton pit, if you're not familiar with it, it's a gravel pit, and the Department of Public Works uses it to store materials. And so if you look down the pit, you'll see dirt and some old asphalt. It's not very pretty, but basically the fence is just for protection. It's also behind the fire station on Greenleaf Street. You can't really see it from there, but you can see it. All right, next slide, please. Right, so there's another picture showing the old rusty fence running along the edge of Hill Street. Next slide, please. And then the after picture, so we're trying to, we're going to set the fence back from the sidewalk, which will allow some open space for the public and walking by. So besides just the open space, it just looks much nicer, and we want to add plantings and we want to add some artwork to it. So it'll just look, it'll benefit the neighborhood. And we have a lot of people walking down that area from the train station, but also a lot of people from State Street. People run along the area, walk their dogs. We have, I could say, over 100 people walking by this area every day. People walk to the graveyard and walk along this street. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so again, this is a little bit repetitive, but just the benefits of beautifying the town and neighborhood by removing the old rusty fencing, adding new fencing away from the rim of the pit, adding shared space, including a welcome corridor for town residents, commuters, and visitors, addition of a welcome interpretive signage, public art display, and native plantings. And it's also going to simplify DPW maintenance, and we had a meeting with them and they agreed with the removing the fence and adding new fence. It's going to be easier for them to blow the leaves and snow removal from the area. All right, next slide, please. So again, stakeholders, so again, Newburyport Department of Public Works, the Mayor's Office, Department of Special Projects, we've talked to all these people, Ward 2 Counselor, and residents of Bethway Neighborhood Association, including 35 neighborhood signatures, and we have letters from 2 abutters for support of the project. Next slide, please. The project timeline, we have 3 phases. First phase would be removal of the old fence and addition of the new fence. So spring 2024 and summer 2024. Or spring or summer to fall, get the new fence put in. Phase 2 would be the next year, 2025, native plantings and welcome sign. And phase 3, installation of public artwork. Next slide, please. So the budget is, the fence removal and installation is approximately $35,000, which includes removal of the old fence, and installation of a 3-rail fence. What we got a quote for was the Ameristar Montage steel fence, which is similar to the new fencing that was the old Kelly School playground. 2x2 posts cemented in, and then that includes mass prevailing wage for the installation. Next slide, please. And then the welcome sign, we don't know what the budget is, but that would be for phase 2. wouldn't necessarily look like that, but, and then native planting, so we don't really have the exact design of the sign, but that's just a sample. Next, please. And phase 3 would be installation of public artwork. We actually have some artists in the neighborhood that we would ask to maybe design some of the artwork. So it'd be nice to keep that in the neighborhood. And next slide. And thank you all for your consideration. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the committee?
Real quick, well, I drove past the other day, I was wondering, so we told you to, why has it just been like that? Seems like that fence is installed probably, I mean, like 50 years ago, why is that? Do you have any idea why it's just been allowed to be like that?
No.
No?
Like I said, it's it's protection for the pit,
Right,
but you can really walk around either side. So it's just been like that forever since it's 30+ years, so probably even more. Just been like that. It's just, an ugly thing in the neighborhood. It'd be nice to get rid of it and put a nice, clean new fence there and just have more space for the neighborhood for people to walk through and maybe enjoy some artwork, native plantings.
Recent storms, a couple trees fell down and damaged the whole thing too, so it's just kind of sitting there damaged. Snow removal is a bit of a challenge too, because it kind of butts up against that fence along that sidewalk. And up until recently, actually, I think Councilor Donahue was able to make sure that that was put on the snow removal list, because it hadn't been removed. So you would have ice that was just kind of layered up on there, so I think there's an added evidence to remove
And it'd
that.
be nice if people walked up from the train station from through uphill street, downhill street, and so a lot of people are coming into Newburyport and they see this ugly fence, so it'd be nice.
Other questions, comments? Jane?
I just have to say, it's really nice to hear from the neighborhood group. No offense, Kim. It's nice to have you here. I'm wondering what your plans are for fundraising for the second and third phase for the plantings and the signage. Or-
Ideally, we'd like to come back, and ask for that, depending upon, obviously, first phase. First phase doesn't happen, then it'd be really challenging to ask for the community to support, second phase, which would be, doing some plantings, the sign and artwork if we weren't able to access it. So I think that second, third phase is really dependent upon securing funding for phase 1. So to answer your question, it would be likely coming back, asking for a much smaller amount of plantings, and a sign and artwork.
Questions or comments from the public? Questions or comments from public attending by Zoom? Please raise your hand.
You do? You have the Councilor Donahue?
Councilor Donahue, you have the floor. Councilor Donahue, you have the floor.
So she's on mute.
Thank you. Sorry, it always takes me a second to find that button. Councilor Jenny Donahue, Ward 2, thank you so much for giving me a minute. I just wanted to comment real quickly in favor of this particular project. This was brought to my attention, I want to say last year, maybe a year and a half ago, and we did have a site visit, and I do want to concur with those presenting that this is kind of a nasty blight in a small section, and I think for short change in effort, we could really improve this this corner that does get passed by quite a few people daily, and being that it is that sort of awkward piece of city land that is at the back end of a DPS sort of dumping zone, it does make sense to reassure the neighborhood that we're not just neglecting and abandoning this area, and the fence definitely needs to be addressed regardless, and it makes sense to set it back and open up that green space. So with your consideration, I really do hope that you would be willing to recommend this. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else raising their hand?
No.
No? No other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for presenting. Next, we have the Meeting House emergency roof replacement from the First Religious Society. Unitarian Universalist, $80,000. Welcome.
Hi,
Hello.
I'd like to thank you all for having us here tonight. And we really appreciate that you postponed last week's meeting due to the tragic loss of Reverend Helen Majida. My name is Julie Menon. I'm a member of the Facilities Committee of the First Religious Society Unitarian Universalist, otherwise known as the Big White Church on Pleasant Street. We're respectfully asking the CPC to consider our grant for $80,000 for an extraordinary roof repair to preserve our beautiful meeting house, which is on the National Historic Register. For the details on this, I'd like to introduce Ed Bootman, who is also on the the Facilities Committee, and fellow member.
Thank you, Julie. I want to thank all the members and staff for the opportunity to present. A roof's leaking. Our goals are to protect the meeting house roof, and it's, as Julie said, we're on the historic register, and features from water damage immediately by replacing the roof in high quality, long-lasting, durable shingles, including an ice shield and ventilation as appropriate, to preserve our iconic building. Secondly, to protect the infrastructure, and I'll say more about that in a minute, to withstand the severe weather. Our building is 223 years old, and it's wood, and it's a lot of work to preserve it. Next slide, please. As I said, we were added to the National Register in 1976. We are in the historic district. Sure, everybody in this room knows that better than I. Next slide, please. We do function under an existing preservation agreement. In December of 2018, we entered that because it requires support from the city under the Community Preservation Act. Next slide, please. The Preservation Act criteria, number one, protect and preserve resources of historical significance. We're addressing that by preserving the meeting house. Next slide, please. Second criteria was to preserve the historical function. This building has been a house of worship from day one, and it replaced the original 1725 meeting house in Market Square. So this is the second building. Next slide, please. To demonstrate public benefit, inside, and everybody's welcome, we have a tiny gallery where local artists and businesses will, for a month at a time, exhibit their wares. These are many times women and minority businesses, artists that need places to show their work. So anyone that comes into the building, the money goes to them. We hold open to the public jazz vespers monthly as much as we can, and also our space is available for community programs. There's about 6 recovery groups a week. We support the Geiger Crisis Center. On Sundays, we take a collection, half of it is turned over to a community partner. 2019, 24 community partners have received over $69,000. So the money goes directly to operations like the Manus House and Gene Geiger. And we're open for the Yankee homecoming tours. Now, this is the beginning, in terms of, public, involvement, and I'll say more of that in a minute. Next slide, please. And our ability to provide permanent protection for this resource. And since 2014, city CPA money, of our own money has been spent, 620,000 on, preserving the building. We're actively working, to build up a preservation trust for future preservation efforts. We don't want to be coming back all the time for these things, and want to be good citizens and carry our fair share of the load. Next slide, please. There is a history, however. The lower meeting house was renovated in 2003, and that's the space underneath that's office and community space. That was a dirt floor basement, and the local contractor and architect did that project and received all the approvals. I don't see any record of CPA money there. However, in 2014 and 2015, we did receive 2 grants from the city. A lot of that was triggered by a discovery when we were removing the paint from the building to stain it and preserve the original nature, following all the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines, preserve the structure. A workman on the scaffold discovered rot, and our steeple was about to collapse with its revering son's bell. So the city really stepped up. The original grant was 200,000, and then the city added in 100,000. We raised over 461,000. Then there was another 300,000 anonymous donation that we got on top of it. So that's what we put into preserving one of Newburyport's most iconic structures. Next slide. Here's the problem. These are shots in the attic. It's the queen post in the northeast corner that would be down by Market Square. You can see the separation. You see the horizontal beam where the yellow thing shows. You can see the truss, the knee brace separating out, and that has literally the pins in there. You can see the hole where the pin originally was in that knee brace. And on the right, the ceiling joist is separated from the gable end. There's about 7 inches of a drift of the building over the 220 years. Next slide, please. Looking out from the steeple, ongoing maintenance has been performed. You can see the different color shingles. And just in the last year, we've had over $4,000 in unbudgeted funds that had to be used to preserve the interior and protect water. Next slide, please. This is the damage on the inside. Plaster on lath, peeling from the water. We'll have to clean that up once we fix the leaks. And the picture on the right, you can see a little dental molding that pervades the meeting house. And, so it's a significant problem. Next slide, please. And, we have, wonderful architectural resources that, we're asking for your help to protect. And, well, you haven't been in there, you're welcome. I'm happy to, lead tours. Next slide, please. So we've secured pledges for the roof emergency, congregational contributions, 6,500. The Hale Foundation has pledged 15,500. We've held out a little bit because 2025 will mark our 300th anniversary, be our tricentennial. And we're looking to partner with the city and maybe making this announcement a little prematurely for the capital campaign, but that's our intention. We want everybody, whole community in Newburyport to be part of the celebration and help us move forward to preserving both our historic buildings. So the board authorized the grants team, one of my jobs, and we've already applied for a grant of 250,000, and could be up to 500,000 from the National Fund for Sacred Spaces. And we're just getting started, so there's a very active group. We meet every Thursday, and we've identified over 100 potential donors, and we're working away at making sure that these buildings are here for at least another 100 years and beyond. Next slide, please. So infrastructure assessment and preservation, that's the interior separation of the beams and reinforcing the roof with the changing weather patterns and things like that, and the dried timber sheathing. Had a structural engineer come in, who's experienced in historic preservation, and she's told us what we have to do to preserve this roof. We saw it pretty much following the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines for roof repair, and received 4 bids from a well-respected local contractor who's the preferred contractor that has done work in both the city and other churches, and with stellar recommendation. We noticed that the site of a lot of the water damage is the southeast corner, and going back to old reports, there was a problem in 1997 with the southeast corner having a leak, so that point is vulnerable. And we talked to the roofing contractor, taking an extra close look at that corner to see, similar to the steeple problem, that there is additional damage, that we're looking at it now and not ignoring a potential future problem. That brings us down to our request of you for 80,000. We understand there's contingencies that we can't know until we start doing the work, and we'll have to adjust as we go, and just do that in partnership with the Preservation Committee and the city. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, comments from the committee?
I do.
Okay.
Caitlin, could you back one slide for the estimated cost? In the application, you mentioned that, and I think you just mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong though, that there's already been a structural engineer that's gone through the project. Is that part of that $35,000? In other words, have you already spent money for a structural engineer in that assessment? And is that reflected in this budget?
We may need, we spent some money, that's, money we may need additional. And, some of this is a contingency, but, the board did allocate money for that assessment. It's a very reasonable price. It was, I think less than $2,000.
I guess it's mostly for the infrastructure repairs, right?
Right, well, and that was, well, the preservation part is those beams that are becoming separated, her advice, thank you, to, in line with Secretary of the Interior standards, stabilize those beams so they don't become further separated.
I'll just give you a little context to my question. I'm concerned because I don't think, although we would need to discuss this because I'm not saying, I know for sure that we cannot recommend funding for work that's already been completed. And so if there's been work completed within any of those items, I'm questioning if we would actually be able to recommend funding for that because it's already been done.
There is no work. The 35,000, most that could have been in that figure, would be $2,000. So we turn to 33, then if that's the rules. We'll have to look at the rules.
That's helpful, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Any questions or comments from public? Any questions or comments from public attending by Zoom? Please raise your hand. No questions. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your kindness and your hard work. Thank you.
And we have the Custom House Masonry Restoration Supplemental Funding, the Newburyport Maritime Society, $42,200.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Nice to meet you, committee, and staff to help get this presentation done. My name is James Russell, Executive Director. Crystal House, and joining me by Zoom is Greg Collins. I think Greg is familiar to most people on the committee. He's kind of the intellectual godfather as we think through how we renovate and conserve the building. So Greg, I think you're on the phone now and you'll be joining us. I guess that's a yes, right?
Yeah.
Sure. All right, let's run through this. You gotta keep the most exciting for last. We're gonna be talking about money here. I'll be delighted to talk about the mortar repairs and show you water leaks if you'd like. But I felt explain why we're coming back to you. I wish we didn't have to, but so first of all, I just want to recognize, since 2005, CPC has been the strongest, most consistent supporter of Custom House. It's over 500, or it's $519,000 critical structural support. That is a non-trivial sum, and I want you to know that there's a plaque being erected at the Custom House recognizing this. So thank you. That was something the board asked me to state specifically. The second thing is, listening to the other presentations today, I think it's also important to recognize that the work that CPC is doing in the wood appurtenant structures and properties, that benefits us too, and particularly, for instance, the presentation by Mr. Vining, where we're talking about climate control and protecting against sea level rise. Of course, that directly impacts us because we're greatly concerned. And one of the major projects we had last year was to put on floodgates and replace the back doors to try to mitigate. So there are other projects that you're funding which directly or indirectly benefit us. So thanks for that. I hope you might be able to help us out as we kind of work our way through this particularly needly problem. In the 2022 application, which was presented to you in great detail. The museum said it was going to be able to commit 25,000 of our own operating funds towards that, and it was one of the ways we were able to build our budget. Unfortunately, the front door restoration project still needs a little bit of work for tweaking, but that did exceed budget, and it necessitated drawing down on some funds. And although I would say that the finance committee of the board has been raising funds for a building committee, for a building fund. It's currently at 171,000. Market was pretty good today, so maybe it's at 172. But we're highly reluctant to dip into that funds at the moment, because we really need to let this grow to about $500,000 or $1 million so that we can draw down 4 or 5%. Just for the ongoing maintenance, which obviously this building needs. So we don't want to cannibalize that building fund that we've been trying to build up. So it's part of the logic we're coming to today. Secondly, if you look at some of the work that was done by my predecessors in trying to raise funds, unfortunately, we weren't successful. Part of the game plan here is obviously to leverage CPC funding. Essex Heritage Partnership grant came in with a small grant. We're going to direct that towards the portico aesthetics, which I think is appropriate given the nature of their mission. But we were declined by a number. You can see it there, 1772, Amelia Peabody, Mass Cultural Council, and Yorkie. And we've got a couple of new funding requests in that we're hopeful for. But I would have to say that if you were to assign a probability to it, I think the probability would be low. For instance, in previous positions, I've had a lot of success with Mass Cultural Council Facility Fund, but not at the customers. We hope to change that, and we're working hard towards it. But I wouldn't assign a high degree of probability to that coming in, and I certainly wouldn't recommend to the board that we sign contracts for significant amounts on a hope and a wish. Next slide, unless there's questions on that. So just a brief review of the proposal to refresh. It's really two stages. It's got to do with water infiltration in both cases. The entry portico restoration, there's leaks through the existing flat seam coated roof that dates back 35 years. And it was particularly evident that this winter, you could see the water running down the inside of the granite columns there. Now, the result of that, what we don't really know is the possible internal rot, which may have resulted over time, but more than likely, once that copper roof is removed, we're going to discover that there's some areas that need to be worked on. That wasn't factored into the original proposal, so we've increased the amount of money that we're allocating from 150,000 towards an expected cost there. And secondly, and this is partly aesthetic, but also structural. It's the proposed replacing of the bead roof board ceiling, and you can see some rot on the edges there. And also, there's a light fixture, which is rather delicate, and I can attest to that because it was up there with a ladder over the holiday festivals, and it's partly dangling, which then of course raises questions to what about the associated wiring, which probably dates back to 1973 to 1975 when that ceiling was put in, so perhaps there needs to be some work. The point is we have to allocate more of that original 150,000 to taking care of both the structural, the ceiling, and also the roof portico. So that gets us to the masonry repair. Just bulk water has leaked into in a number of areas from open joints or porting mortise joints, and this is, you can see this particularly in the lower level where we have our classroom. And you can see paint peeling, dust, for instance, falls on the collection, gravel falls on the collection, and that needs to be addressed pretty quickly. And so we're recommending a spot repair masonry joint on the east facade. Next slide, please. And so let's look through specifically what we're looking for here, and then I'll pass this over to Greg for specifics of the project. So we received 150. Why is this funding not enough? So there's discovery of more unbudgeted work in the portico that I referenced. There's the lack of success in raising additional funds from outside agencies. We hope to rectify that, but we don't know that. And we probably won't know, for instance, in the Mass Cultural Council until September. And then we need to, there's a minimum dollar threshold before really starting the border with the repointing project, because to put that in context, a full recut, we're not doing a full recut, we're just doing a spot repair. But a full recut a couple of years ago was quoted at $327,000. And so we've come, so Greg did a lot of good work, which we're very confident, and we have a high degree of confidence working with Thompson in this particular project. And he was able to negotiate with them a much lower price at $150,000, which is increased to about $157,000. We're fearful that that's obviously going to increase if we don't move forward with this project. So the simple math suggests that there's 42,000 that we need soon if we're going to hopefully start this project in Q3. And the reason for starting the project in Q3 is we're going to hear from Mass Cultural Council whether yay or nay in September, and we'd like to push the project off. The other reason for pushing this project to September is that we were hoping, I was hoping to be able to tell you today that we'd started the portico project 2 weeks ago, but you might recall it was raining, and then we were hoping to start it this week, but it was raining. So I was hoping to be able to have some more specifics on the extent of the rot, which could be below the copper roof, but it's being pushed off. But the point is, let's do the portico first. Let's see where we stand with that, because there's some days and flexibility which will be required. And that's going to give us some remainder, which we're estimating to be about 120, 121. And then that allows us to sign a contract with some level of confidence, because what we don't want to do is sign a contract that's going to run over and put the organization fiscal jeopardy, the operating side. I can take some questions now, or maybe Greg would like to comment specifically on the scope of work for the portico or the masonry.
Greg, you prepared to weigh in here?
Sure, I'm available.
Okay, if you'd like to comment specifically on the scope of work, and then we can open it up to questions.
Okay, Caitlin, could you connect to the next set of slides? My name is.
Could you go to the next slide, Caitlin, for Greg?
The next tab on the PowerPoint. Thanks. So my name is Greg Calling. I'm with Merrimack Design Architects. I'm a former resident of Newburyport, and I have been working on and off on the Custom House project since 2009, and I've overseen, I was the chair of the building committee in 2009, and I've been involved in various preservation projects over the years to help preserve this important building, and also preserve the collections that are contained within. So this project entails masonry repair work to the east facade, which incurs quite a lot of damage because of the exposure from the North Atlantic. If you could go to the next slide, please. particularly on the right side of the east facade, at that corner pilaster, there's been movement over the lifespan of the building where the masonry facade at the corner pilaster on the right is pulled away, and there is a mortar joint that's over an inch wide there. And we're proposing to repair that joint and replace it, take out the mortar, repack it with new mortar, and then put backer tape and a sanded sealant over it so that it's a flexible joint, so that it stays, so that it keeps the water out of the building. Right now, that joint is open, and the mortar that was installed in, I believe, 2009 is deteriorated. So we're proposing to replace that. Next slide, please. And then the same on the north facade, where there are some points of high exposure, particularly along the gable roof, where some of the mortar has come away from fallen out of the joints, and we'd like to do spot repairs there as well. Next slide. This is an example of some wetting of the stone on the south facade. That there's a mortar wash that was placed on that facade in 2013 on top of that cornice, and apparently there's some water that's been going through one of the vertical joints there, and we'd like to address that also as part of this repair project. Next slide. And these are some close-up images from the 2021 Conservation Assessment Report, showing the bulk water infiltration in the photo on the upper right, on the from underneath the ceiling in the portico, and water staining the columns there. And there's a view of that beadboard ceiling and the bullet light fixture. And there's a drone photo on the bottom left that shows the condition of the existing lead-coated copper roof, which was installed during the 1972 to 75 restoration, and the copper seam work was not oriented properly at the hips, and it was recommended that we fully replace that and in kind with a new flat seam roof with the seams oriented in the correct direction. Next slide, please. And then these are more photographs from the 2021 report, which these items were prioritized as part of that report. You can see that joint that I described before on the left with the red arrows point to it. It's just to the right of that downspout. And then there are other areas on the upper left photograph, though there are still iron setting wedges that they use to set the granite blocks and space the joints, and those setting wedges are exposed in that photo. And when we did the work in 2013 on the south facade and the west facade, all of those setting wedges were ground back an inch into the joint and then protected with new mortar so that we prevent rust jacking there and damage to the stone. The slide in the photo on the upper right shows where water is entering at a windowsill and then exiting below through a joint. And we'd like to spot repair those open joints. And same thing with the other two photos on the bottom right. Those are, again, completely open joints that need to be mortared to prevent bulk water intrusion into the building. Next slide. These are close-up photos from, we worked with Trippy Engineering Associates and worked with a building, a thermal envelope engineer, and these are some of the areas of intrusion that he also identified. That's a close-up of that 1-inch wide joint. And then the top photo are exposed iron setting wedges at the northeast corner of the building. Next slide, please. Again, more photographs that support the work that we're proposing to do. Deteriorated mortar on the upper photo, and then missing mortar, and then a close-up of the iron setting wedges. So that's it. We appreciate the support of the CPC and for the ongoing repair and care of the Custom House. Thank you very much.
Questions or comments from the committee? Questions or comments from the public? Any other members of the public attending by Zoom? Questions or comments, please raise your hand. No questions. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Greg. All right, moving along. Everyone knows that deliberations are on the 21st. And as this whole scope of that meeting will be deliberations and voting. And usually we can get it done in one meeting. If not, we'll have to reschedule and carry it over, but usually we do get that. The only other business from the chair was I encourage everyone, especially the new members, but also as a review for old members, to check the city's website where they've got information for all board and committee members, especially about open meeting laws. And the big takeaway from that is if you've ever got either by email or letter or sitting around a restaurant table, more than 4 of us, you got a quorum and you can't talk business. Okay. So be very careful about emails that are either reply to all or go to, more than 4 of the committee members, unless it's just for administrative purposes, like, yes, I'll attend the meeting or something like that. Anything that it can be considered discussing business that comes before the committee is considered deliberation, and that needs to be in a public meeting. Okay, good. Planning director, any new business?
Unless there's anything anyone wants to ask about. If you do want to take a walk down the waterfront at some point in the coming, days or weeks, take a look. We're starting to see the, evolution of the landforms and things forming up Market Lane Park. So
I saw it.
feel free to take a peek. Yeah. The next couple of weeks and next couple of months, we're really going to see it start to come together. So.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes of February 29.
So moved.
Okay, second? I'll second. Any questions or comments or changes, additions, corrections? No. All in favor of approval? Raise your hand. Thank you. Okay. Anybody else have anything else? I didn't make my 9 o'clock deadline. All right. This thing was, anyway, I think we're adjourned. I'll have a motion to adjourn. There it is, in a second. They're all in favor. We're raising our hand that we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
We are.
Yeah.